At 2:11 in the morning, the old woman worked the gold ring off her finger under the fluorescent light of the accounts window. And it did not come easily, because she had not taken it off in 41 years, and the finger had grown around it the way a tree grows around a nail. She had to wet her knuckle with her own mouth to get it past the joint. The clerk behind the glass watched her do it without a word. And behind her, on a trolley in the corridor, a young man she had met 90 minutes earlier lay gray-faced with a tube in his arm. And the number on the slip of paper on the counter said the deposit had to be paid before they would take him up to theater. She set the ring down on the steel tray, under the glass, the way you set down something you have carried your whole life. She did not cry. She slid the tray toward the clerk and said, "How much time does this buy him?" And she did not know, as she pushed her wedding ring across that counter to save a stranger's son, that the man whose life she was paying for had a father, and that the father had spent 11 years looking for a debt he had never been able to repay. Her name was Comfort Mensah, and she was 68 years old, and she weighed 54 kilograms, which was 9 less than she had weighed 2 years before, because 2 years before her own son had died. And grief is a thing that eats a body slowly from the inside, whether you feed it or not. She sold boiled groundnuts and roasted plantain from a tin tray on the corner of a lane in Nima, in Accra, and she carried the tray on a folded cloth on her head from 5 in the morning. And on a very good day, she cleared 30 cedis. She had a granddaughter, 8 years old, named Afua, whose mother had gone to Italy to work and stopped sending money and eventually stopped calling, so that it was Comfort who plaited the child's hair every morning, and Comfort who walked her to the government school, and Comfort who lay awake doing the arithmetic of school fees against groundnuts. She wore 2 things that were not cloth. The first was the gold ring, thin now and worn almost to wire on the underside, that her husband Emmanuel had put on her finger in 1983 in a church in Kumasi with rain on the tin roof, and that she had kept through his death and through her son's death and through every month when selling it would have solved everything, and she had chosen, instead, to go hungry. The second was a small brass crucifix on a black cord that she pressed to her lips before she picked up her tray each morning. She did not think of herself as a woman who had nothing. She thought of herself as a woman who had exactly enough, which is a different thing, and which is the reason she still had the ring at all. The night it happened, she had stayed late at the lorry station near Kwame Nkrumah Circle because a driver owed her 8 cedis for plantain and had promised to pay when his last trip came in. It was raining the thin, cold rain that comes at the edge of the season. She was folding her cloth to start the walk home when the accident happened, 40 feet from where she stood, a taxi and a motorbike. And the young man on the motorbike came off it and slid across the wet tarmac and did not get up. And the taxi did not stop. And the 3 or 4 other people at the station looked and then looked away, because a stranger bleeding on the road at midnight is a thing that can become your problem if you're not careful. And most people are careful. Comfort was not careful. She was 68 years old, and she knelt down in the road in the rain and put her folded cloth under the young man's head, and she held his hand and she talked to him the whole time. The way you talk to someone so they do not go where the quiet is pulling them. And when a shared taxi finally agreed to take them, she rode with his head in her lap, all the way to Korle-Bu Teaching Hospital, with her dress soaking through with a stranger's blood. At the hospital, they moved fast at first, and then they stopped. And the stopping was the thing. A nurse came out to the corridor where Comfort was standing and dripping onto the floor and said the young man had internal bleeding and needed surgery. And then the nurse said the other thing, the thing that hospitals say, the thing that the people who tell this story have all heard, said to them or to someone they loved. There was a deposit before theater. That was the rule. The young man had no wallet on him. It had gone across the tarmac in the crash, and no phone that still worked, and no family that anyone could reach at 1 in the morning. And a rule is a rule. The clerk at the accounts window was not a hard man. He was a tired man on a night shift, following a procedure that was not his to change. And he said the number to Comfort through the glass, as though he were reading a bus timetable. Because when you say that number 40 times a night, it stops being money and becomes only a number. And that is the quiet machinery by which ordinary people end up dying in corridors. Comfort had 4 cedis and 60 pesewas in the twist of cloth inside her blouse. She stood at that glass and she understood, the way you understand a thing in your body before your mind agrees to it. That the boy was going to die 3 meters from a working theater because of a number, unless she did something. And there was only one thing in the world she owned that had a number attached to it. So she took off the ring. There was a gold buyer's kiosk that stayed open all night by the hospital gate. The kind that exists precisely because places like this create people like her at hours like this. And the man there weighed the ring on a small scale and offered her a price that was a fraction of what 41 years were worth. And she took it. Because 41 years is not a number you can bring to an accounts window and a deposit is. She carried the notes back inside in her fist and pushed them under the glass and asked how much time it bought him. And the clerk counted it twice and picked up the phone and said into it, "Tell theater the deposit's cleared." And 2 orderlies came and took the trolley away through the swinging doors. And Comfort Mensah sat down on a plastic chair in a wet dress with a bare place on her finger where the ring had been, and she did not know the young man's name. She learned it at 6 that morning, when he was out of surgery and stable. From the admitting sheet the day nurse let her see, because by then everyone on the ward had understood what the old woman had done. His name was Kwabena Osi. He was 26. And when Comfort walked home to Nima in the morning light to wake Afua for school, she did not tell the child what she had done, and she did not tell her about the ring. And when Afua asked, at breakfast, where Grandma's ring had gone, because Afua had never in her life seen that finger bare, Comfort said only that she had put it somewhere safe, which was, in the way that mattered most, true. If this story is sitting on your chest the way I think it is, take 1 second and subscribe. Because what happened when Kwabena Ose's father found out who had paid that deposit is the part you are going to want to have stayed for. She went back to the hospital every day, not because anyone asked her to, but because she had held the boy's head in the road, and something in her had decided he was hers to worry about now, the way her own son had been. And grief that has nowhere to go will attach itself to whatever it can reach. She brought him cocoa in the mornings when he could eat. And she sat with him in the afternoons after she had sold what she could. And she did not once, in 11 days, mention the ring or the deposit or the money. And when Kwabena, who could tell that something had been done for him that no one would name, asked her directly how the surgery had been paid for that first night when he had come in with nothing, Comfort waved her hand and said the hospital had sorted it, and changed the subject to whether he was drinking enough water. This is the thing you have to understand about her. She had not done it to be repaid. The moment she pushed the notes under the glass, in her own mind, the matter was closed. She did not know how to be owed anything. It embarrassed her, but Kwabena Ose was not a poor man's son. And this is where the second layer of the night opened up. The layer Comfort could not see. Kwabena had left home 2 years earlier, after a bad quarrel with his father. And he had been living cheaply and refusing his family's money to prove a point that young men need to prove. And the wrecked motorbike and the empty pockets were part of that proving. But his father was Daniel Ose. And Daniel Ose owned the largest private chain of pharmacies and medical supply companies in the country. The green and white shops you saw on every second corner, including though Comfort never made the connection, the very brand of saline that had been dripping into his son's arm. And when Daniel Osei finally reached his estranged son 11 days after the crash, because a cousin had heard, because news moves, he came to the ward, and he sat by the bed of the boy he had not spoken to in 2 years, and he asked, as a man of his kind asks, the practical question underneath all the others. Who admitted you? Who authorized the surgery? Who paid? And Kwabena told him about the old woman, the groundnut seller who had knelt in the road, the one who came every morning with cocoa and would not say how the deposit had been paid, who waved her hand when he asked, who had a bare pale band on her finger where something had clearly been worn for a very long time. Daniel Osei went very still while his son spoke, because Daniel Osei was not only a rich man asking a practical question. Daniel Osei was a man who, 39 years earlier, had been a boy of 15, orphaned and hungry, sleeping in the market at Kumasi, and a young newlywed woman selling groundnuts had fed him from her own tray every evening for a year and asked nothing, and had once, when he was sick, sold something to buy him the medicine that saved his life. And he had grown up and grown rich and built an empire on medicine precisely because of what medicine bought at the right moment had done for him. And he had spent the better part of 11 years, quietly through people he paid, trying to find that woman to repay a debt he had decided could not be measured. He had never found her. Kumasi is large and 40 years is long, and the poor do not leave records. He had made his peace with the idea that she had died without ever knowing what she had made possible. He asked his son, very quietly, what the old woman's name was. Kwabena said, Comfort. Comfort Mensah. And Daniel Osei asked whether she had ever mentioned Kumasi, and whether she had ever mentioned a husband named Emmanuel. And Kwabena, who did not understand why his father's hands had started to shake, said he thought so. Yes, she had said something once about being married in Kumasi in the rain. What Daniel Osei understood in that moment, sitting by his son's bed, is the thing that turned this from a kind act into something with the shape of justice. And it is where everything that had been buried for 39 years began, finally, to come back up. He did not go to her that day. A man like Daniel Osei knew that you do not repay Comfort Mensah by pulling up outside her lane in a car worth more than the street and pressing money into her hands, because she would refuse it and be shamed by it, and the whole meaning of what she had done her whole life would be insulted by it. So he did it the way it had to be done. First, he had the gold buyer's kiosk by the hospital gate located, and the ring found, it had not been melted. It was still in the tray of unsold pieces, thin and worn to wire on the underside. And he bought it back for many times what had been paid for it. And he had it cleaned, but not changed, because the wear was the point. Then, on a Tuesday morning, he came to the ward when Comfort was there with the cocoa. And he waited until she looked up. And he did the thing that no one on that ward had seen a man of his kind do. He knelt. He was 60 years old in a gray suit, and he went down on one knee on the ward floor in front of a groundnut seller. And he took a small, worn gold ring out of his pocket and held it up so that she could see it. And Comfort's hand went to her mouth. And Daniel Osei said, in Twi, the language of the market in Kumasi, you fed a boy for a year and asked nothing. You sold something to buy him medicine when he was dying. I have been looking for you for 11 years to give this back. And Comfort looked at him, at the gray hair and the suit and the shaking hands, and under all of it, she saw the 15-year-old from the market. And she said his name, the name of the hungry boy, not the name of the pharmacy on every corner. Daniel, she said, little Daniel. And she did not reach for the ring. She reached for his face, He put the ring back on her finger himself, past the knuckle, into the groove 41 years had worn for it, where it had always belonged. What he did after that was not dramatic and was not a check, because he had understood her by then. Afua's school fees, through to university, were placed in a trust in the child's name, with papers administered by a lawyer, so that no monthly kindness could ever be withdrawn by anyone's change of heart. Comfort's single room in Nima became, quietly, a small block of 3 rooms with a proper roof and running water, bought outright and put in her name. And Daniel Osei's company established a fund. He named it the Comfort Mensa Fund, over her objection, that did one exact thing. It paid the theater deposit for anyone brought into the emergency department at Corlebu at night, with no family and no money, so that no clerk on a night shift would ever again have to read that number through the glass to someone who had nothing to push back under it. The first plaque they mounted by the accounts window did not have his name on it. It had hers. Kwabena Osei recovered fully, and he did not go back to proving points to his father. And he took over the running of that fund himself. And he called Comfort Grandma, and Afua gained an uncle. The clerk who had said the number that night was not punished, because he had done nothing but his job. And that was always the point. The rule was what had needed to change, not the man following it. And the rule did change, at that hospital, because of one old woman and one thin gold ring. Daniel Osei thought he had spent 39 years in debt to a woman he could not find. But the truth is that Comfort Mensa had never once, in all that time, thought of him as owing her anything. And that is precisely why the debt could come back the way it did. She had given a hungry boy food because he was hungry and she had food. She had sold her medicine money because a child was dying and she had a thing she could sell. She had knelt in the road at midnight in the rain because a stranger's son was bleeding and no one else would. She did not keep accounts. She kept a ring and a small brass cross and a granddaughter's hair plaited every morning, and a way of moving through a hard world that had never once required the world to be fair before she was good in it. You can be poor by every measure the world uses. You can wear a ring worn to wire and clear 30 cedis on a good day and go hungry so a child can eat. But there are people who do not build their lives out of comfort. They build them out of what they give away, out of the boy fed in a market, out of the ring pushed under the glass, and what a person like that puts into the world does not disappear. It waits. Sometimes it waits 39 years. And then one Tuesday morning, it kneels down on a hospital floor and puts itself back on your finger, past the knuckle, into the groove it wore there long ago. And you understand that nothing you gave was ever really gone. It was only out looking for the way home. If a stranger's son were dying in front of you tonight, and the only thing standing between him and the theater was the one thing you had carried and loved your whole life, would you push it under the glass? And here is the harder half of the question. If you did, and you never told a soul, and you asked for nothing in return, do you believe it would ever find its way back to you? Or do you think the world only works that way in stories? Leave your answer in the comments. I really do want to read it. And if stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until the day they change everything are the kind of stories you want more of, subscribe. Because that is the only kind I tell here. I'll see you in the next one.